Welcome to KBcast, the podcast for security executives, interviewing people from around the globe on how organizations can operate smarter and stay safer. Here's Carissa Breen.
I sat down with Jenai Marinkovic, who's an ISACA member, and we discussed the recent ISACA report, State of Cybersecurity 2021. We walked through some of the insights that were illuminated in the report, some of which included that the industry is significantly understaffed, retention of talent, as well as formal education and training associated with entering the cybersecurity workforce. If you're keen to listen to the breakdown of this report, then this episode is for you, so please keep listening. Okay, so Jenai, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. I'm excited to speak to you because your energy is infectious, just the few minutes that I've been speaking to you this morning, but also because we are going to dive into the recent ISACA report that's being deployed, and some of the key insights are quite interesting. But before we dive on into that, we always like to start our podcast off with talking about you and your journey. So can you please talk our listeners through where you started to where you are now?
Sure. A little bit of first off, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk with you about the survey. A little bit of background on myself. I'm a cybersecurity and tech executive with about 20 years of experience designing, building, operating global Fortune 100 cybersecurity capabilities at scale. So I've done everything from risk management to security research to threat management, defense, and forensics. And I'm actually one of the few people out there that have experience in this world called converged security. And that's where you combine physical security and then crisis management capabilities. I'm currently in a technology advisory board for an award-winning design firm called Beyond. I'm a founder of an apprenticeship program called the Next CISO. I'm also the founder of a think tank called the GRC Center for Intelligent Ecosystems, where we analyze the security implications of artificially intelligent thinking systems. And I'm a member of the ISACA Emerging Trends Working Group. Just finished a lecture today talking about visibly diverse organizations and how do we, address the skills gap of today. And then finally, I am one of the 13, identified as one of the 13 top women in cybersecurity defense by Information Security Magazine, and a finalist for the CTO of the Year Award in Women in IT. And so my background, how I got started is as a kid, I wanted to be a forensic pathologist. That was my deal. But what happened is that I ended up going to a trip to a bookstore, and I happened upon this old magazine called 2600 and fell in love with cybersecurity and digital forensics. And so I had the opportunity to start working for an international investigations firm called Kroll. And then I had the chance of building cybersecurity at companies like DIRECTV and Electronic Arts, and then became the chief technology officer for a design company and chief information security officer for a design company. And then finally moved to the company I'm working with right now, which is Tiro Security, where I help companies build out end-to-end cybersecurity capabilities. And ultimately led me to working on building and founding this apprenticeship program called the Next CISO, which helps ultimately identify and help uplift and amplify women and people of color so that we can get them into the world of cybersecurity and GRC and ready and fit for purpose day one.
Whoa. Okay, that is a lot of stuff. It's pretty cool though. You've done a lot of things which I really, really like, because I think sometimes as well people forget that when you do different things, you have different experiences, you wrap all that knowledge and you bring it forward to the things that you're doing day to day.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's diversity, so, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. I don't want to blow it on diversity and monocultures and so forth, but the more diverse our background is, the more experiences we have, and that's going to be absolutely key kind of moving into this future world.
100%. So a couple of things with the 2600 magazine, what was in there that really sort of sparked your interest, that you sort of were like, wow, I really want to work in this cyberspace?
Sure. So there were several articles that started, and I mean, this was back in 97, 98. So, and, so they talked about a couple of things. One was phone hacking, which was really big at the time.
Freaking.
Yes.
Oh my God, wow, that is old school. Totally forgot about that, actually. Yeah, okay, cool.
So there is that. Ham radio, was really big at the time as well. So I ended up finding myself at things like ham radio fests and so forth. But really it was the idea of understanding technology and ultimately reverse engineering ways of exploiting that technology that really got me going, which kind of went back to why I really wanted to be a forensics pathologist, which is weird, but I wanted to understand, how somebody passed, what caused those problems, how you would detect that in the human system. And the translation from that into digital forensics was rather seamless for me.
So I know you spoke before around the next CISO. I want to loop back on that, but I want to get into this report, like really going through it, because I did read the report and some things were quite interesting in terms of the different viewpoints. But so let's start from the beginning, because like you said, I don't want to blow it too early. So one of the report covers cybersecurity resourcing. Now, this is really interesting because I hear two sides of the coin. So people in the industry saying we don't have enough people, and then the other people saying we've got enough people, but they don't have the relevant skills. So the statistics show that cybersecurity staffing is significantly understaffed.
Yes.
And somewhat understaffed. So let's start here. So talk me through this. This is always a curly one that pops up in the space as well. But what's your thoughts? And then what do you think that our sort of plan is as an industry to recruit more talent?
Sure. So we've got a couple of things kind of going on here. Like you mentioned, the differing perceptions that we're properly staffed or that we're understaffed. And look, the reality is that all organizations across the board are understaffed, period. We do not have enough trained staff to address the problems of today, and we certainly don't have the trained staff to deal with the problems of tomorrow. As you mentioned, 61% of survey respondents said that the security teams are understaffed. So when we look at things, we've got to not just look at the road activities that we see general cybersecurity capabilities doing. We need to consider the increased risks as a result of these highly complex and integrated supply chain, that we're seeing today, right? We're seeing manifest today in terms of those problems. We've got to look at things like emergent technology and the way that you design security and control structures around thinking artificially intelligent systems is very, very different than the way that you would say, for instance, secure a simple web application. And there's just not enough people in the industry today to help all companies and industries and governments across the board protect and defend these digital ecosystems and, quite frankly, the people now, that are ultimately under their charge. So we've got the force, we've got a lot of things kind of going on right now in that, we have a lot of people that are trained at the upper level of the scale, but we simply do not have enough people at the entry level that are coming into the world of cybersecurity. And, we've got some other problems there in that we have a lot of people who are interested. Right. We've got a lot of people who would like to make that leap into becoming, cybersecurity and GRC people. And we'll talk about this also a little bit later. A lot of companies simply don't want to hire junior people for a variety of different reasons. So on one hand, we have all of these open positions and we need to bring people in. But on the, and we've got people who are interested, but on the other hand, we're not willing to bring those people in because one is you are required to invest a lot of time and effort bringing a junior person up to speed. So it takes 6 to 7 months to get somebody who doesn't have experience in the world of cybersecurity to the point that they're actually taking work off of the plate as somebody who's more senior. And not only that, but you're dealing with risk. So if I'm bringing somebody on, I'm already oversubscribed. And on top of that, I need to train this person and we end up getting breached because of that. A lot of companies simply aren't willing to take the risk to bring these junior people on board. So in terms of, how do we ultimately formulate these plans? What are some of the things that, we're going to ultimately need to do? A couple of things. One is you've got colleges, universities, boot camps, apprenticeships, and mentorships and internships that are all forming to kind of help in this very decentralized way solve the problems. Some organizations are trying to help, build these more well-rounded candidates, by training non-security staff who are interested in moving into security roles. I believe that 43% of the people who responded to the survey indicated that that's the tact that they're taking. 37% were saying, hey, let's increase the usage of contract employees or outside consultants, definitely seeing that. 23% said, hey, let's increase the use of reskilling programs, which I'd love to be able to dive in a little bit in a bit. And then 22% said increasing the use of performance-based training to build hands-on skills. So what ultimately that all says is that there's not one quick way of dealing with these, the shortage and ultimately how to solve it. But at the end of the day, I think that starts to identify the tension between, are we understaffed or are we somewhat understaffed?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting as well, because then if you see like a job ad, it's like you have to have 10 years of experience and this and that. It's like, well, how is that possible? And so as a result of people seeing those types of job advertisements, they're getting deterred. Or I've seen various people speak to me and say, I've done some, quite a very quick course to get into cyber, and I'm not a cyber expert yet, but then people don't want to take me on. So how are we addressing that problem? Because there's reports like the ISACA one that are saying we don't have enough people, and then people are then trying to get into the field, but then employers don't really want to hire them, and I get it because they feel overwhelmed, they don't have the time, they feel like they can't get their head above the water. But then I understand that, but then you still have to make a move regardless, or else we're going to get to, the next few years, and we're going to have no one left because everyone's going to be burnt out and they're going to be over it.
So that's all true, and it really is difficult as a hiring authority. I understand and I empathize. You've got a couple of problems. Boot camps present this problem sometimes, and certainly just taking a course, and actually oftentimes just coming out of college, is that you're not ready day one. There is so much that you have to be able to understand in order to be productive inside a cybersecurity or GRC program. Companies need to widen and bring more people on board. But if you don't have enough capacity inside of a company to ultimately address that, to mentor, to train, it's not just about the technical skills, the human skills, and at this point are becoming oftentimes more important, than some of the hands-on skills. Though a lot of those things people simply lack. And so when you bring that person on board or people on board, you're making the leaders and the team leads less productive, which means that you're increasing risk. And if you don't have another way of kind of balancing those scales, then you end up in trouble. So what that means is that we need to have more on the, job training programs where actual client work, actually working inside of a corporation, but under people who know how to get you up to speed and get you properly trained is really one of the key ways that we're going to be able to do this. Because the onesie twosie things of me bringing on somebody and mentoring, boot camps that do a good job at making sure that you have some of the hands-on skills, but don't necessarily effectively prepare you to work inside of a corporation, don't necessarily prepare you for how do I take my results and present them in an attractive way that an executive can understand and digest, understanding the politics. Understanding, when you're dealing with cybersecurity, you're dealing with some pretty heavy topics. And emotions run pretty wild, so understanding how to de-escalate, how to negotiate, right? A lot of those human related skills also kind of come into the picture as well. So apprenticeships and making sure that, you can get people with some level of on the job training before they come to a company, I think is one of the ways that we can deal with it. And then obviously there needs to be a wholesale effort. And I see that happening of, stopping this whole thing of you need, for a junior position, I need to have 5 years experience in CISSP.
I know. I'm just smiling and nodding because I've heard all of these things. I like, de-escalating, 100%. A lot of ego as well that seems to fly around in this space. One of the things that I'm sort of hearing that you say is it doesn't feel like all the reports, even last year's report says the similar stuff, right? Just the numbers have changed. And if you go to any conference, everyone says the same sort of thing. what do you think is the bottom line? Like, what's the reality? We keep saying we're understaffed, we don't have enough people, and because most companies now are built on technology, which ultimately needs security to be wrapped around it, do you just think that we're just never going to get there because the same stuff pops up time and time again, and it doesn't really feel like we're moving the needle, if at all, or it even feels like we're going in reverse?
Certainly, if you watch the news, you feel like we're going in reverse. So we're seeing more and more large-scale security breaches happen, and often a lot of that is happening because, and we talked about it a little bit before, we have these incredibly complex, interconnected supply chains that did not exist the way that they did in the past. So our attack surface is increasing. It's more interconnected. We've got more devices that are, especially when you focus in, again, bringing in emergent tech, like things like sensors. So all of that is making it, far more difficult. So now what we are seeing is an increase in automation. That's ultimately going to help. But automation is not, a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all of these problems. No, I do believe that at some point we're going to come to some, equaling level where we, can start addressing these issues. But what it is going to take is a global effort of upskilling and getting people who are currently not in the world of cybersecurity and getting them trained into, this industry. When we look at the world of automation is taking people's jobs. So I actually live in rural California, and so I can tell you right now that automation is killing jobs out here. And so what this is it's opening up this very unique opportunity of bringing people who think differently into our industry, but whose mindsets are actually really similar. So I'll give you a couple of examples. A nurse, a landscape architect, a mechanic. When you look at a nurse and what a nurse has to deal with day in and day out, they deal with protection and defense systems. They have to think holistically. They deal with high emotions and crisis situations. They understand process. So it's like all of a sudden, a lot of the skills that you see in nursing actually transfer really nicely over to the world of cybersecurity. And landscape architect are the same. They deal with plants. They deal with complex ecosystems. They deal with protection and defense. So it's like when you start to kind of see a lot of industries where there are similarities and they do think very similarly, we can start targeting them and then start cross-training them and bringing them into our industry. But up until now, we really haven't been willing to do that. We were taking people who already had kind of a predisposition towards tech and trying to retrain them and reskill them. So as an example, bringing network engineers or systems administrators, right? So and cross-training them and bringing them into the world of security. But that's not enough. If we're talking about 3.5 million unfilled jobs, trying to bring more people who are in tech into the world of cybersecurity, that's not going to cut it. We've got to bring people outside of the industry.
No, you're absolutely right. And I historically have not come from like a traditional tech background myself. And I mean, this is going back, 7 or so years ago, which wasn't that long ago. But I still felt that maybe even transitioning into the space, people still... there's a stigma, maybe similar to the nurse, like you're redeploying into the space, like what do you really know? And that doesn't really help. It doesn't build a camaraderie. You do feel at the start that, can I sustain doing this? Because I don't really know what I'm doing. I do feel like a fish out of water. And so I feel like that sort of ties into the next point around the retention stuff, because I have heard people... I mean, there's the female perspective as well, of a lot of women leaving because potentially of misogynistic males and what they say. That's one element of it, but as well, and I think people perhaps not feeling that there's growth in this space, or they don't feel good enough because, again, I haven't come from a traditional tech background. That doesn't mean that I'm not valid in the industry, and I still feel that people are thinking very old school like that. So I know that in the report, it sort of mentions 58% of talent were hired by other companies. Now, this happens a lot in Australia. We are quite a small nation compared to the US, for example. But when people are sitting there just poaching talent from other companies, doesn't really solve the issue, right? So how do you sort of propose that we solve this problem? And do you think I'm being too optimistic in thinking that this problem will just dissipate? Like it's quite common in the insights that I was reading in the ISACA report, for example.
So let me just start off with, it is an absolute requirement for all cybersecurity people to be optimistic. So no, you are not being too optimistic. If we don't have light at the end of the tunnel, then if this is going to work, it is going to ultimately be solved, but it can only be solved through diversity. One of my dear friends, she had this quote, and she says, she's actually a landscape architect, and she says monocultures die. And right now, in the world of cybersecurity, one of the least diverse industries in the world, we live in a monoculture. And what ends up happening is in monocultures, you end up with groupthink, and you keep trying to solve different problems, but the same way. And you figure, well, I'm just going to throw more at it. And none of that ultimately works. So the only way that we're ultimately going to solve this problem is not to continue to have, ultimately poach from ourselves, but to bring in people who think differently, which is what you're going to have to do. If we think about it, technology is being designed. It's diverse by design. Which means that we have to respond to that by bringing on a more diverse workforce. And if we also look at it through this lens that, we're in the fourth industrial revolution, which is this interconnection of the physical, the biological, and the digital worlds, it means that we're going to be encountering problems in a way that we've never seen before. So you need people who think differently. You need people who look differently, because if we look different, we think differently. We need people who are more neurodiverse, to ultimately, help solve this problem. And the only way to do that is to be able to build these training programs that are designed to take people who are not technical and retrain them and reskill them in a way so that they can be productive ultimately day one. But the whole scavenging and poaching from one company to the other, it's not sustainable. It's certainly not scalable. So you can't fill 3.5 million, jobs by just, moving, the chessboard from one place to another.
No, I totally agree. So when we speak about, and maybe you can talk on the CISO that you're sort of involved in my experience, you talk about diversity of thought and diversity. I almost feel I see the eye rolls happen. I also think, now I am making quite a general sort of assumption, it is perhaps from the older generation as well. I know even I'm technically in the eyes of in the world, I'm on the younger side of the female. I used to feel that I was judged. It's very different now, but younger as well. And so I guess that they sit here and they say we want diversity, but then almost sort of like begrudgingly don't want to, invest in that side of things. I've seen it before. I've heard it behind closed doors. So there's this theory of we want diversity, but then they don't really in terms of the reality of it. So I just want to get your honest thoughts, because this is a problem. People are leaders are saying that that's what they want. I believe a lot of them are genuine, but I do believe people are disingenuous when they do speak like that.
Sure, and that's a fair kind of assessment. So I absolutely, I've heard it all, right? That, hey, I want diversity, but then on the flip side, they'll say, well, organizations where everybody thinks a lot move faster. And you'll start to hear the generalizations of, well, if I'm working for a startup, I want to make sure that everybody thinks the same, because if everybody thinks the same, we'll be able to bring the product to market faster. And when you have people who think differently, and challenge the norms and challenge your assumptions and so forth, that adds friction to the process, and that is difficult. And so, I think, again, one of the ways that we deal with that is by, as part of these apprenticeship programs, you've got to teach people how to navigate politics, because you are going to be dealing with, on one hand, some of the old guard and the old ways of thinking, but you're also going to be dealing with people with other perceptions and so forth. And what you don't want to end up with is this analysis paralysis where you cannot move forward because nobody agrees, so you have to teach people, how do I bring, new ideas and new thoughts, but really understanding the political environment in which I'm navigating and how to bring those ideas in a way that I don't stop forward progression, but I ultimately help, people, kind of think of it a different way and, and make those leaps. You cannot innovate without having diversity of thought. You just can't. A proper apprenticeship program, a proper boot camp program should be teaching people, how do I navigate that? How do I bring these ideas in a way that I don't necessarily threaten, the old guard, but I do bring a new way of thinking.
No, absolutely. There's another industry peer and a friend of mine, Shannon Cedric, he's an Australian here. And he's sort of spoken publicly around like the next wave of CEOs and leadership is going to fundamentally change what we're seeing today. So would you say that the next wave as well of the people who are sort of retiring now, will we see that shift? Will it become a little easier perhaps? Because I don't know, if I go back to even like the way my parents were working, is really, really different. There was a book that I read years ago called Manager 2.0, and it just basically talks about how to engage with people from different generations. It's not that they're better or worse, it's just that they're different. And I think that in order to bring in the diversity of thought, what you and I have been speaking about predominantly today, I think that it's going to probably mean perhaps a different generation that think a little differently to, I guess, bring down those barriers and those walls. And I know that is a bit of a general assumption. Not everyone is like that. So I want to caveat saying not everyone is like that. But I have sort of seen that through reports that I've read, even through literature that I've read as well. I think that will change. But again, that's going to take time, right?
It is going to take time. And, I think with every wave, you see change. The experience that the boomers brought to the table in terms of leadership and management was very different than, their parents and Gen X and boomers and so forth. So I do believe that, with the next wave, millennials are already in management positions. And so, with Gen Z coming online, we'll see, a completely different way of thinking. That stated, there are skills that boomers and Gen X have that the other generations don't. And the reason is that Gen X and boomers were born into a world that was not connected. Right. We were born into the digital age, and whereas millennials were born into this connected age. And so we remember a time, where you had to pick up a phone to call somebody, right? That we weren't connected, that, and the skills that you build, the human skills that you build, that oftentimes boomers and Gen X has, you don't necessarily always see that in some of the younger generations. And so what I would say is that as these new generations start to come online and bring, new diversity of thought and way of doing things, also to understand and learn from those previous generations so that you end up, taking the best from those generations and then build something that's new, because it's absolutely critical. My generation and the generations before have killed ourselves, right? Working ridiculously long hours and the amount of stress that you bring to the table, because it's one of the few jobs where your failure can lead to your CEO having to testify in front of Congress, so that amount of stress, causes, and wreaks a lot of havoc, not only on your body, but on your family, right? So the devastation that's left behind because of all of that has affected, large, families. And I'm really hoping that this next generation, that this new wave of leadership is going to say, what are you doing? and look to different ways of dealing with it.
No, absolutely. And like I said, this is really just up for discussion. We're not making any assumptions. If you are listening to this, like, we're not having a go at you or anything like that. We just really want to put it on the table. We want this conversation to be honest and raw and real so people can get insights from this. So the next thing I want to sort of talk to you about, Jenai, is the report also talks through a high percentage of talent who left their roles due to limited promotion and development opportunities. I know myself, when I was working a large bank, I often did hear that floating around as well. Like, people said, well, this is the role that I'm doing. I've been doing this for a while. Where do I sort of see myself? But no one could really articulate that well. So what do you think sort of the plan here to try to retain staff? And are organizations even aware that this is a recurring problem, or?
Yeah. So organizations are aware that it's a recurring problem. They're just kind of stuck. And so, with this answer, I want to do two things. I want to bring, some and highlight some of the learnings from the survey. But I also kind of want to talk about some out of the box ways of thinking, to approach how we would ultimately solve this problem. So the Tech Workforce 2020 survey report indicated that the top reasons that people are leaving positions are they're looking for more interesting work, better compensation, better culture, and more upward mobility, which totally makes sense. And they showed that employees stay oftentimes because of work-life balance, the location, interesting work, and ultimately their compensation. And what to me, when I look at the current work environment that people are currently in, and when they stay, why they stay, I look holistically, how would I ultimately address the problem? And you got a couple of ways of dealing with this. One is that security leaders need to be arm in arm with their chief people officers. We're really good at tech. We're really good at business, but we're not always experts in all things that are human. And we're dealing with very human problems here. And your chief people officers, especially if they're really good, really understand this. And so, one of the things that we need to do is look at our security workforce and our security organizations through the lens of these workforce transformation initiatives, where we start designing people strategies, with experts, in the field. So enter your chief people officers. But in terms of out of the box, I would say one of the things that you can do are engage design firms. And the reason is that design agencies help organizations like reimagine the employee experience. And while oftentimes they tend to focus on more revenue-driven organizations like your sales or customer care teams, these are organizations that are experts in human-centered design. And, one of the things that, we can do is we can start engaging these design firms to help us really understand what is the digital experience, what is the work experience for a cybersecurity, worker. So if you use these user-centered design principles and you start to identify, and focus on some of the areas that we talked about, in the survey, so areas like why do your staff depart? Why do they stay? How do they advance? How do we keep compensation in line? They're going to uncover that, but they're also going to uncover areas of friction and tension, things that don't oftentimes get brought to the forefront, areas like context switching. So if you look at a forensics person or a defense person, they'll have 100 apps running, trying to correlate data across multiple systems, and the context switching, and the cognitive overload that happens as a result of that. Oh, it does. It does, to the point where you have to kind of pull yourself away, and your heart is racing. There is a physical manifestation as a result of context switching, and it runs rampant across the cybersecurity industry. And part of that is because security people were not trained, traditionally in design or design thinking or design principles. And so when you look at our systems, and our, the experience that comprises, the cybersecurity experience, it's oftentimes I use the correlation of the Borg, where it's just these, additive systems to solve these problems, but we never kind of take the step back to look at things through the lens of what the most important person, in this ecosystem, and that's the security person. So by doing this approach, by engaging design firms to ultimately help us solve these problems, we can actually bring some new concepts, some concepts that are traditional to design, but not so common in terms of the world of cybersecurity. Things like user journey maps or empathy maps. How do you feel when you're using this system and doing this thing at this point in time? And if you do those types of things as well, you actually can result in redesigning and re-architecting your systems in such a way, that it allows you to accomplish your task, but in a way where it doesn't have quite the neural load and the increased amount of stress. So one is engage your chief people officer, look at what does a workforce transformation strategy look like for a cybersecurity workforce, and an out of the way, kind of like out of the box thinking way of accomplishing that is looking at engaging a design firm to help you accomplish that.
I guess also what you're saying is if people are feeling that their employer is actually listening to them by doing the surveys, like how do you feel when you use the system? it's probably automatically going to send signals to employees by saying my employer genuinely cares about me, they want the best for me, they're actually trying to improve my experience of working here as well. So I guess even that, I mean, I've worked in companies before where no one did nothing like that, and you sort of feel really not cared about, I guess. And I think that perhaps that was a sole reason as to maybe because I moved on. I mean, I don't know, but perhaps because I didn't feel heard and I didn't feel that people was taking a genuine interest to make my work environment better, perhaps as well.
Yes, the tricky part about things like surveys is that if you don't follow them up with meaningful action, then it's worse than if you didn't. If you did the survey in the beginning, if you did, than just not doing the survey. And the reason is that, well, I took your insight, but then I did nothing with it, and so there's this drop in enthusiasm and morale as a result of it, and a lot of companies get stuck in that. So that's where design thinking actually comes into play, and that is, I get your insights. I look at, different things like low-hanging fruit that I can do to try and, ultimately help my people. And I prototype and I pilot. And you experiment and you innovate and you try, little things, but just things where it's like people can, you're taking my insights, and not only are you doing something, but there's this demonstrably measurable impact as a result of you doing things. So it's absolutely critical that, you don't have these, strategies, that where I publish the strategy, I say we're going to do all of these things, I get your insights and stuff, but then at the end of the day, my life hasn't changed. I'm still working, 120 hours a week. I'm still super stressed, and I still feel like you don't care.
All talk, no walk, right? No level of integrity.
Yeah. Have to follow it up with meaningful action.
100%. I love that. Absolutely. I want to get into now the education side of things. This is really interesting. So, okay, when I was reading the report, I was reading that there was a whole section on the university degrees versus training courses, etc. And the report specified that hands-on training was more important than a formal qualification. That was one of the insights. But then it mentioned that 58% of respondents said that they required their applicants to have a university qualification to fill not a senior role, an entry-level cyber position. So, wait, what? Can you make sense of that? Have I read it wrong?
No, you read it right, and it's because we're at this inflection point in the in our evolution in the world of cybersecurity. So the industry's been stuck in these old hiring practices that ultimately prioritize university degrees. Even though, like you mentioned in the survey, prior experience, I think it was like 95%, of the respondents said that it's more important to have hands-on experience. And, so I would say a couple things. One is, we mentioned before, we are not a diverse industry, which means that we tend to hold on to older ways of thinking, believing that if we just do more of the same, then we'll ultimately solve the problem. I think, especially amongst, certain generations, we were taught, it was, banged into us that a university degree was absolutely critical in order to move forward. But the problem is a couple of things. One is that when you look, that technology moves incredibly fast right now, right? So within 18 months, the things that I learned today are deprecated and no longer
Your skills
valid.
atrophy though as well. Like, my skills have atrophied. That was only like 7 years ago. So
they do, which means you have to constantly stay on top of it. And if I'm spending 4 years in college and I'm learning, a certain tech, that may be old by the time I get, out of school. The other is that, and I'm going to, put it out there to colleges, they've struggled to differentiate themselves from the knowledge that you gain as part of being in part of a collegiate program versus the knowledge that you actually gain from on-the-job training. And so it's the college, and that's, I think, where the tension is that I've been taught as a leader that it is important to hire people with college degrees. But when I look at the people who are coming to me and people who don't have college degrees but have hands-on experience do very, very well inside the corporations. And so and that's where you're seeing the tension. and, ultimately some of the recalibration that needs to happen. So colleges have to differentiate themselves from the knowledge that I gain as part of, being in the school, from the knowledge that I gain as part of, on-the-job training. So they have to do that, and they have to be able to train people rapidly. Meaning that the skills that I ultimately learn are skills that I'll be able to apply, with an over-indexing, quite frankly, on something that on-the-job training programs may not be the best for, and that's your human skills. We don't talk about this a lot, but there's this concept called the augmented workforce. And, what that means is that with the advent of, combination of both artificial intelligence and automation, you're going to be working alongside a digital assistant. Right? It doesn't make sense for humans to keep doing, these rote, simple activities over and over again when a digital assistant can do it. And right. And so if I'm working alongside, a virtual assistant, then the skills that were important today aren't necessarily skills that are important tomorrow. My human skills become more important. And so, colleges, may want to also look in terms of over-indexing on human skills to ultimately help. But, strong partnerships with apprenticeship programs and so forth, and companies to make sure that, not just your senior year, but almost at the freshman year level, that people are starting to work inside companies. And that's, I think, where you start to see the breakdown. But I mean, look, Google came out recently and said, that college degrees aren't necessarily the defining factor, for whether or not somebody's going to be successful. And in a world where, so much knowledge is at my fingertips, right? When you look at the amount of online information that I can get, colleges have to be able to deliver something that's patently different. And so I think that's the tension that you're ultimately seeing.
I guess the other thing is as well, you can't really determine someone's human skills on a piece of paper, right? So I don't have any college degree. I mean, now it's probably changing. I'm looking to go and do a master's and all that type of stuff, just in terms of credibility. But for me, I didn't have any of that. So on paper, I mean, I haven't applied for a job for a long time, but if I did, I'd probably look pretty bad. But as soon as I get in front of someone, it changes. And I've even heard, like, back in the day, recruiters saying, like, no, you've got to speak to this chick, like, she's really good. And so then I can see the conversation change, right? But on paper, I look terrible. So if you look at and you mentioned the word, recalibrate. So maybe in talent acquisition functions in large corporations, they need to look at that. Like, we're going to abolish. You don't need a university degree, so to speak, because a lot of them as well use automation to just sort of, to detect whether someone's got a degree, and then people who don't are sort of just automatically like thrown out of the whole recruitment process, right? And so I think that's always, that could be a problem. Someone can have a university degree, but not be very knowledgeable or have any sort of intelligence behind them as well. So I think it's really hard that we're sort of defining people straight off the bat on a piece of paper, which in some cases people completely make up anyway, so it's falsified.
Yes. And here's what I would say, on the flip side, in terms of, people who don't necessarily have, let's say, the education, a degree, and so forth. There are other ways to get that experience onto your resume so that until the systems catch up and are able to look at what your capabilities are versus what this piece of paper says, are things like doing projects on the side. So almost anything, right? In the world of cybersecurity, I can do a side project on, so coordinating with different groups, coming up with, real challenges to ultimately solve that can demonstrate my technical skills or, my specific skills, are ways to be able to get that experience onto your resume so that you can at least get in front of people and not have the degree be that defining factor. The other thing is that I am starting to see more and more jobs say, college experience or equivalent work experience. So I have definitely seen a dramatic increase from there. So I think that change is already happening. It may not be happening fast enough, but certainly if you start looking on LinkedIn and start looking at the jobs, you'll start to see more jobs say, equivalent experience.
I think also that from what you're saying, there probably needs to be some training or upskill around how to actually interview people as well. not just following some stock standard script that was developed in the 80s. I think, and asking people questions, because you can get a little bit of insight about their personality, how they handle things as well, and how they would approach certain things. I think if you ask things a certain way, you can derive those answers out of people without asking it so directly. But I think there needs to be a bit of a shift on that front as well, like educating managers or talent acquisition managers as well, because I often do see a disconnect. Talent acquisition managers completely sending CVs for people that aren't qualified for the jobs because they don't have necessarily that comprehensive understanding of what that analyst may need in terms of skill set or what they're looking for. So I've actually seen a lot of internal conflict as well, because you have to go through them, you got to follow their process, it's their talent acquisition function, and if you start going around them, in my experience, it doesn't go too well. But I just used to find that the people that they would send is like, well, that's not really what I'm looking for. It's completely the opposite of the person that I asked for. And that's probably not their fault, because they're not cyber people, right? They're talent acquisition people. So there needs to be really more of an alignment against the cyber team and the talent acquisition to get the right people in, so we can interview the right people.
And I'd love to continue on with that. So you do certainly have a problem in that many people aren't taught how to interview. Both in human resources and recruiting functions, as well as certainly in the world of cybersecurity. So I think you've got that problem. I think the other thing is that looking at people through the lens of what they're capable of doing, right? So looking at the way that they think. Looking at, again, backgrounds that are non-traditional, but when you take away the name of the position and you actually look at the work that they were doing, there's correlations, to the world of cybersecurity that are very interesting. And so, I do believe that there's going to be a movement, towards training people to look at, like, what are you capable of doing, versus, do I have a CV that ultimately checks all of the boxes? I think that's something that we're certainly starting to see. So it goes back to diversity, though. All of what we're talking about here, we are seeing the same record playing over and over again, right? So talent acquisition people who are, looking for, these unicorns that don't exist, and, cybersecurity people that are writing job descriptions for people that don't exist, is a replay of a record that we've been doing for the last 20 years. And the only way to break that is to bring in people who think differently. And if you bring in people who did not come through those traditional backgrounds and they're in leadership positions or they're in talent acquisition positions, then they're going to hire people that are similar to them, right? They're going to hire people that think outside of the box, right? So you only need a couple in order to be able to affect that type of change in an organization. But diversity is the absolute key.
I love that. I love that as well. I think that that's something that hopefully the movers and shakers are going to start leading the way in this space. Another insight that's really interesting, touching on, again, the formal education side of things, was that what extent do people, so there was an insight saying what extent do people agree or disagree that recent university graduates in cybersecurity are well prepared for the cybersecurity challenges in their organization. But then the follow-up insight was 40% neither agreed or disagreed on the confidence derived from uni degrees. So talk me through this. And secondly, as employers are claiming they want talent who have degrees as specified earlier, but then they don't have strong confidence in the degrees that they already hold anyway. So what's the reality? Like, what does that even mean?
I think it's evidence of the groupthink problem that we talked about earlier, that senior leadership, people who are in senior leadership positions, it was taught, right? It was banged into you, college. So that's really hard, right, to divorce yourself from, when that was something that you were probably taught from a very, very young age. But at the same time, you also look at the proof is in the pudding, right? So you look at your own organizations and you look at people who have degrees, and you look at people who don't have degrees. And if the skill sets are similar, right? If the work product and the productivity is similar, then you have to start kind of asking yourself, well, does it really matter? And I think that contention and that friction is what people are ultimately struggling with right now. And so, and again, if your organization is comprised of people just like you at the leadership level, you're going to have this groupthink, and you don't have anybody that can challenge the assumption to say, well, why don't we just start hiring people? And it does, like, if you have a degree, that's great. If you don't have a degree, that's great. Why don't we start looking at people, through a different lens, and really change our hiring practices, the interviewing practices, as you mentioned before. As an example, there are some interviewing practices that take people's names off, that we don't see pictures of, that, we start to actually interview people. In fact, I've seen companies where the hiring authority doesn't get to see the resume. That you have just a quick write-up on the person, and you have to do an interview based on that person's capabilities, not necessarily of what you see on the paper. So you start taking away the things that have bias as part of the hiring process, right. You start to kind of like remove that. But yeah, ultimately, the contention that you're seeing, the reason that you're seeing, people say, yes, I want degrees, but on the other saying, but I'm not really seeing any demonstrable, impact because of that, is because of the era from which we've come, and that the world of yesterday is not the world of today, and the way we solved problems yesterday simply isn't going to work in a world that no longer exists.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and I think I'm a bit of a fan of the underdog. I definitely would say I was a bit of an underdog back in the day as well, so I probably used to get overlooked, but yeah, I like that, the write-up, and then you have to go in there and you see the person for who they are, not what they are, whether they come from some fancy college or some fancy area. I think that doesn't determine someone's capability. And I think people that potentially have come from that underdog background have actually outperformed people. There's a book that I read recently. It was called Mindset by Carol Dweck, and it really does go into a lot of this and how people with fixed mindsets, how they operate, and then people with more of a growth mindset on how that, because of their mindset, that they just could overcome a lot of their obstacles and just smash it. And it speaks about athletes and all this type of stuff. Like, it's really interesting, and I think that similar approach needs to be applied to how we look at cybersecurity practitioners, because at the end of the day, they are people, and I think that we need to look beyond just that piece of paper. And I think that we will, like you said, looking at the diversity side of things, and I've spoken about this publicly as well, just to mention that cyber criminals, they don't have university degrees. They don't have a structured way of thinking, right? So we need to get people from unstructured backgrounds, like you're saying, the nurse or whoever it may be, that has a different way of thinking and operating, because that's what we need. If we have everyone from the same pedigree, as you mentioned, like, we're not going to have the depth and the breadth that we have or potentially could have with hiring people from different backgrounds and different skill sets. And not only, the other thing is as well, if you have people that think differently, sometimes, and I have been in the situation before, you almost get ostracized from the other people that think the same, right? So that's hard to combat that as well. Even though you are thinking differently, you want to be outside the box, but then people, they think differently of you because you're not thinking like them as well. How would you sort of overcome that challenge?
So, and I want to kind of look at this two different ways. And that is, one is, through the lens of that person who is different in an organization where everybody thinks the same, versus how do you solve the problem? And that's, you don't want that one person who thinks differently to be the only person in that organization. The idea is you want as much diversity as you ultimately can, because the problems that you're trying to solve are very diverse and complex and require people who think outside of the box. So if you find yourself as that one person who thinks differently, then that one is tough, and you actually have to kind of lean on a political savviness of understanding, that how do I deliver my message and my idea in a way that is digestible by the people around me, right? So if I'm constantly challenging the status quo, then people aren't going to listen to what I have to say. But if I understand the way the machine works, and I understand how to get and innovation teams deal with this all the time, how do I get my idea in a way that works inside of this machine? those are the type of skills that you're going to have to be able to build up so that you can get your kind of the way that you think and your ideas, listened to, as averse to oftentimes what ends up, people end up thinking about people who think differently is that, you're flying the wheel, you're slowing us down, you just like to complain and so forth. So you've got to be more politically savvy if you're the only one. But again, the way to solve that is to have organizations that are not just diverse, but know how to deal with difference of thought. Because I will say, when you have an organization of people who think differently, it does slow things down a little bit. Because oftentimes they're raising red flags to say, wait a minute, you do have to kind of build a culture that understands how to deal with and navigate, a more diverse way of thinking, so again, that's a chief people officer can kind of help you do that, your organization has to be diverse in order to be able to handle that. And if you're the only one, you have to be politically savvy. Otherwise, it's not going to work, because at the end of the day, you have to understand your culture, the culture of the environment in which you work. And so you have to understand how to deliver that message.
Oh my gosh, I think I've definitely attributed to companies being slowed down because I had that different way of thinking. But in light of all of these statistics, now I know that I've really appreciated your thoughts as well. You're being really tangible. You've given 1, 2, 3, sort of this is what you've got to do. So I do hope people listening can take some of Jenai's thoughts away. I just want to sort of just summarize our whole chat, because this is an executive podcast and people perhaps may or may not know what to do. So let's just make it really easy, 3 top things that executives can do who are looking to recruit and retain talent as well as upskill. What would be your advice? So only 3 things.
I'll figure out how to do this so that they're not big run-on sentences.
Fair enough.
Let's see. So one of the things that, an organization can do is ultimately tackle this problem through strong partnerships, coalitions, outreach programs, and building strong relationships with apprenticeship programs. Working with programs that are trying to bring people, from non-technical backgrounds into the world of cybersecurity, helping those apprenticeships understand how to understand your culture, in your ways of doing things, so that they can ultimately upskill and get people ready for tomorrow, ready for working in your environment. So I think that's 1. 2 is I'm going to hold to this one: engaging a design company to ultimately help you build out your workforce transformation strategy. They are experts at helping you think outside of the box and looking at ways to ultimately solve the problem in a way that works for your company and your company's culture. And let's see, what would I do in terms of 3? Internal. So identify entry-level staff, inside of your companies, employees or other people that are both in tech and non-technical roles, and look at them for opportunities to ultimately upskill and bring them into the world of cybersecurity. One of the things that's really nice about that is you actually kind of get 2 for the price of 1, because they understand the culture. They understand the way that things work, but they're also going to be out-of-the-box thinkers, and so they'll bring a level of diversity into your organization. So look inward.
I love all of those. I really appreciate it, Jenai. I really loved your energy, your thoughts, your diverse way of thinking as well, and just your honest approach, right? We want to cut through the noise. We want to give people real answers, not the airy-fairy, politically correct answer. I think you've cut through that. You've given us really raw and real responses to problems that do exist. We are going to drop the report in the show notes so you can download that through ISACA. And Jenai, really appreciate your time. Just lastly, if people perhaps have a question that I did not ask you today, even though I asked you about 75, how can they go about getting into contact with you?
Oh, sure. So there's 2 main ways of getting a hold of me. You can find me on Tiro Security. I'm on their website under their Virtual Chief Information Security Officer Services. But the best way is under LinkedIn. And so if you just go to linkedin.com/IN/my name, which is Jenai Marinkovic, JenaiMarinkovic, and reach out to me there, I will get back to you.
Well, thank you so much again. It was awesome to talk to you, and I can't wait to get you back.
Right on. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and your audience.
Thanks for tuning in to KB Cast, the cybersecurity podcast for executives. We always value your support and would love it if you could leave us a review or a comment on your platform of choice, iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, and that's always appreciated. Till next time.